Hi, I'm Mehul Harry with Developer Express, and in this video we're going to take a look at how to use an XPO data source with the ASPxGridView. Now the XPO data source supports what we call the server mode. The server mode feature was developed when working with a large amount of data in your backend. What usually happens when you work with a standard data source and a grid in ASP.NET is that if you query the database for an operation like a paging or sorting, all the records from the database will be pulled to your web server, which effectively makes your whole website slower. So the server mode feature solves this by creating what we call a smart query. Regardless of what operation you need, such as paging or sorting or a summarization, that will be pushed to the backend. So the query will actually run in your SQL server, and that way only a small amount of records that you need to display are sent to the web server and ultimately to your client. So this makes your website much faster, much quicker. And it's really quite easy to set up. So let's take a quick look at how to set up the XPO data source within ASPxGridView. Let's get started by creating a new web application project. The first thing we want to do is generate our persistent classes. We can do this by adding a new item, selecting persistent classes, and giving it a name. Usually you want to call it the name of the database. So in our case, we'll call it server mode grid tests. Now this wizard will come up that'll let you specify the connection information and pull in the tables that you're interested in. So I'll select my local SQL server and the server mode grid projects database. Here you can specify the tables and the columns that you want to import. For this demo, I'll import in server-side grid test along with all the columns. And a lightweight code file is generated for us. Here you can see this is just a representation of the actual table, which specifies the key information by attributes and so forth. Now, let's add a global application class that'll let us initialize the XPO data source at the application level. To do this, we'll select another Add New Item and select the global application class. Now, within the application start event, we'll add our code that will be used by XPO to initialize. There are two properties that you definitely want to specify. In the get connection string, we'll specify the server and the table that we're going against. In our case, we'll be going against the local SQL server and the server mode grid projects database. And we also want to specify the data store schema. In our case, this will be the server mode grid projects server grid test database, server grid test table. Now, we'll do a quick compile to make sure everything's okay with our project so far. Now let's drop an ASPxGridView onto the default page. We'll go to the default ASPX and go to the design mode and drop an ASPxGridView, and we'll also drop an XPO data source. Now let's set up the properties for the XPO data source. Set the type name property of the XPO data source to the persistent class that we imported. We also want to make sure that server mode is enabled. Now let's hook up the XPO data source to the ASPxGridView. Now we have pretty much everything set for the ASPxGridView to work with the XPO data source. And because Express Persistent Objects works with sessions, we need to add one line of code to the code behind of the default ASPX page. So let's go to the code behind, and to the page init section of the default ASPX file, we'll add a session to the XPO data source. Now the page init method has the same signature as the page load, so we can simply copy it and rename it to page init. Now we'll specify the XPO data source, set its session equal to a new DevExpress session, and we're finished. Let's now compile, and let's run the application. The first thing we'll notice here is that we have 10 records and 50,000 pages, which means we have 500,000 rows in our table. Now, switching between the pages will take us a couple of seconds, regardless of what page we go to, because a smart query will handle only getting 10 records. But this is simple paging, so let's also enable grouping and filtering on our grid. We'll set the Show Group panel and enable filtering. Now let's take a look at it again. Now we can see we're still working with the server mode, and switching between pages takes only 1 or 2 seconds. But we can now also group. We can move columns back and forth. And we can also sort. So let's say we want to find every message from Jeffrey. So as you can see, it only takes a couple of seconds to even move back and forth while the data is being filtered or grouped or sorted or even paged. So as you saw, using the wizard with the XPO data source makes it very easy to set up. And in a future video, we'll take a look at how you can also use the link server mode data source to use the server mode feature and the link features of ASP.NET 3.5. Thanks for watching.